Welcome to my YouTube channel, Carlo Levi Minzi. Welcome to this live streaming, and glad to see you again. Once again, don't forget to subscribe and ask your friends to do so. Today is a special day for us musicians. We are talking about a very important composer, and whose birthday is today. Today is Johannes Brahms' birthday, and we would like to wish him happy birthday, of course, even if he is long time dead. Johannes Brahms is one of the top composers of classical music. This channel, don't forget, is devoted to classical music and to promote appreciation of this kind of music. And not only mine, but of course, everybody's. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ambrosio Rosete. And thank you for joining us. Don't forget, once again, to subscribe to this YouTube channel and to appreciate classical music. Not only subscribe, not only ask your friends to do so, but also to listen to the videos and to appreciate this music. We are working on this kind of appreciation, and we are happy to have you here. And let's talk about the man we are celebrating the birthday, and of course this man, Johannes Brahms, was born in Hamburg, northern Germany, in 1833 this day. And he was a pianist, composer, and also conductor. His father was a double bass player, and his career was much less important than Johannes. He was playing around, and to make a living, he was playing in pubs and in the area of the port of Hamburg, and he was playing with prostitutes and sailors, and therefore he was playing in these places, and unfortunately, Johannes, as a kid, had to accompany him to play with him, to accompany at the piano. His career as a musician started like this, and was really a really bad thing. He was traumatized because of this, and he remembered it for the whole life. Even if, of course, he was not blaming his father, who had to make a living to support the family, and this was the only way at the time to do. Nevertheless, the father supported him and did his best to guarantee him a proper education. He had very good teachers, and studied with many teachers, and finally with Edward Marksen, who he taught him both piano and composition, and he learned a lot, and he dedicated to him his second piano concerto in 1881. Brahms started a career very young. At age 20, he started playing around with a Hungarian Hungarian violinist by name Edo Remeni, and had a tour around Germany, and in very difficult places. At the time, the career was very hard. It's not like today, there were no plane, and trains were very uncomfortable. This is the reason why many pianists in the past used to retire very young, usually in the mid-30s, early 40s, because this trend of life was basically impossible for somebody older than that. In any event, Brahms started this career and his first tour was with this man Edo Remeni, who took him around. He was Edo Remeni was not a genius, was a sort of gypsy violinist, and so this kind of tour was not very productive for the young Brahms. But Edo Remeni did something very important to him. He introduced Brahms to another Hungarian violinist, but of a different caliber. This man's name was Joseph Joachim. He was most likely the most prominent violinist of his time, and became a long-standing friend for Brahms, and friend and supporter. Joseph Joachim was 3 years older, but was already established as a famous violinist. So he persuaded Brahms to get rid of Edo Remeni, and not only that, he did basically something which definitively launched his career, and he wrote a letter of introduction to Robert Schumann, a very famous composer at the time. He was at the end of his career, was very established. He was a resident conductor in the city of Düsseldorf in center Germany, and was a very well-established composer, very powerful man. He placed a lot of students and friends all over the country. So he was a very influential person, a VIP in the field of music. Not only that, he was married to one of the most famous pianists of the time, Clara Wieck, married Schumann. So Brahms went to pay him a visit with this letter written by Joseph Joachim. Schumann, who was a very generous person, recognized the genius of this man. He came with his first works. Schumann read them, heard him playing. When he heard him playing, he went to Clara and told her and said to her, "Come here, you must listen to this genius." So Brahms became long-standing friends of both Schumann and Clara, Robert and Clara, and Schumann wrote letters for him to publishers, and basically forced them to print his music. Not only that, Schumann had written a list of his composition, the composition Brahms had brought him at the time. But we find out that less music was printed. Why? Schumann was reporting about a violin and piano sonata, but this music was never published. Reason why is that Brahms himself destroyed the score. So we don't know. We know nowadays we know 3 violin and piano sonatas, but we know that Brahms destroyed this one and maybe another one. So basically, he was very self-critical, as Schubert was, as every great composer. So basically, at this point, Brahms published 3 piano sonatas and a small piece for piano. But this created a reputation which allowed Brahms to continue on his own. Unfortunately, Schumann, who was already sick and had mental problems for some reason and for some unclear reason, was interned in hospital the following year, 1854, and eventually died 2 years later. Schumann was close to Clara and helped her a lot. And after Schumann's death, helped her to put Schumann's library together and helped in publishing the complete works under supervision of Clara. Clara continued, actually didn't start. Clara had a problem because she had 7 kids with Schumann. One was very, very, very small, but nevertheless, she resumed her piano career and eventually became professor at the Frankfurt Conservatory of Music, and premiered a lot of music, of piano music of Brahms. In the meantime, Brahms was continuing his own career and was writing music. In 1858, he wrote his first piano concerto for piano and orchestra, I mean. And this was a very twisted story. He had started with the idea of writing a symphony, and he had written a set for 2 pianos. But once he was going to orchestrate it, found out that he couldn't overcome the piano writing. So he turned the work into a piano concerto. Once again, Joachim pushed for performance, and so the concerto was premiered in Hamburg, Brahms' hometown, in 1859, with Joachim himself conducting the orchestra. Was not a triumph. It was the piano concerto was just fairly appreciated, but not that much. And same happens a few months later in Leipzig, where Brahms went to play again. And so this concerto at the beginning didn't have a real success. But Brahms, who was on one side self-critical, but he knew what he was doing, commented like this: there will be a day that this piano concerto will be appreciated the way it should. And in fact, that happened, as we know. In my YouTube channel, you can find my performance of this piano concerto, which I played live many, many years ago in 1977. I have performed Brahms piano concertos later, but this is I am fond of this because it reminds me of my youth. But of course, I play it in a much different way, as ever happens. In fact, you can listen to my performance of one Beethoven sonata. We have two different performances, and you can listen how different is one from the other. They were played one in 1984 and one in 2014. And in 30 years, I have changed a lot, as everybody does, most, of course. So let's go back to Brahms. Brahms continued his career, moved to Vienna, where he became very popular. And here his career started. So he reduced his career as a concert pianist around, and in the meantime he became the resident conductor of the Sing Academy, which was the institution which in turn generated the Wiener Philharmoniker. So he was one of the first resident conductor of this. And even when he resigned, he stayed in the board of administration. So in this position, he was able to influence the choice of the teacher at the conservatory. So he became really, really powerful, a very powerful man. And for this reason, his reputation grew more and more. So Brahms, at this point, became an established composer and had a regular publisher. He basically moved to Simrock, who has been his publisher for a long time. At this point, he started becoming fatter and fatter and decided to move much less, even if he liked to go walking around, and he liked to go walking for kilometers and kilometers. He could walk 30 kilometers with no problem, in spite of his weight. But at a certain point, he decided that you can see his photos. He decided to have his beard grown and became a sort of of bear, so to speak. He was not very tall, and so his beard was making a certain kind of effect. And in any event, so he basically tried to become what is really is known now as Dr. Brahms. He always introduced himself as Dr. Brahms. We don't know very much about his playing, about his piano playing. Of course, because we don't know very much about Beethoven, about Mozart, about Liszt, who were considered to be great pianists. We don't have recordings, unfortunately. And Brahms was not this kind of pianist, was not a pianist of the caliber of Beethoven, Liszt, Chopin himself, Mendelssohn, but was not a bad pianist at all. And we have actually one recording of his, unfortunately very small, about 30 seconds, when the Edison cylinder was invented. He was one of the first in 1889 to record something, but unfortunately it's a small piece, an Hungarian dance of his. And but shows, you can find, shows how his idea of playing was. The recording goes back, as I said, to 1889, and we can hear also his voice. He says, "Das ist Dr. Brahms," and then he plays this small piece. It's very interesting because we know that the man had a very high voice, and he had a complex for that. And he tried to exercise his voice to become lower, but he didn't succeed really. He had a complex also because he was not very tall. He was actually small. There is a photo with Joachim in which he is sitting, not to show how smaller than Joachim was, and etc. etc. In any event, let's aside this. Brahms became a very well-established composer in Vienna, very strong reputation, published a lot, and his career kept growing throughout the years. Brahms also sporadically kept playing in Vienna, and was criticized because he was not the kind of virtuoso where people were used to at this point. People who had heard Liszt playing, who had heard the following generation of pianists, full-time pianists like Anton Rubinstein, for instance, who played in Vienna, and this kind of virtuoso could not accept the idea that a pianist less equipped like Brahms could go on stage. But Brahms was not a bad pianist, was not this kind of pianist, he was rather a musician rather than a virtuoso. And this is a problem. It's very interesting because we have this problem now. We have now a lot of pianists who are really, really technically equipped, but are not musicians. And they are actually the most relevant people promoted by concert agents and promoted by the media, which is actually the same thing. And this is bad for music. Brahms was not this kind of man. He fought against this kind of idea of music for his whole life. He had met Liszt when he was young in 1854, and story says that he fell asleep listening to his piano sonata. We don't know whether this story is true or not, but shows that there was a gap between the virtuoso Liszt and the musician Brahms. In fact, Brahms went against Liszt with some friends. They wrote a public statement against what Liszt was doing with the so-called program music based of telling stories, and for this reason he had also some problems. But he was backed by the most important journalist in Vienna, a man by name Theodor Hanslick, and so he saved his neck this way. This is the story, basically. Brahms wrote another piano concerto in 1881, which he dedicated to his old teacher Edward Markson, and performed himself once again as a soloist. This concerto had better success at the time, but Brahms performed it a couple of times in his life, but his piano concertos became really top quality. Also, because they are very difficult. Brahms' second piano concerto is considered to be the most difficult piano concerto in the whole repertoire, even more difficult than the famous Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto, the famous Rag 3, which became very popular because of a famous movie. In any event, those concertos were very difficult. So we don't know how Brahms could play his own music because he had no time to practice the piano so much. In any event, at the end of his life, he met a great pianist by name Eugen Dalbert. He was who became later also director of the Berlin Conservatory. This man performed the two piano concertos in one night repeatedly, and Brahms conducted the performances. At this point, even in Leipzig, the first piano concerto had success, and so Brahms showed that he was right, saying one day people will appreciate it. Now, Brahms piano concertos are among the most popular pieces of this kind. Not only Brahms continued playing anyway, kept having some concert career. Last step was in the same years while he was giving this concert with Eugen Dalbert, had met a clarinet player by name Richard Mühlfeld, and he was stunned by the clarinet sound and by Mühlfeld's playing. So he discovered the clarinet, and in his last part of his life, he wrote pieces with the clarinet. He wrote a quintet for clarinet and strings, performed by Joachim and his quartet plus Mühlfeld, and two clarinet and piano sonata, performed by Mühlfeld, of course, and Brahms at the piano. So Brahms played till almost the very end of his life. But this clarinet, the clarinet and piano sonata were almost the last pieces he wrote. This goes back to 1895. Unfortunately, a few months later, Brahms got sick and started being feel badly. He was diagnosed with liver cancer. Even if he never knew about this, doctors didn't dare to tell him that he was dying, and tried to keep him up some way. Brahms stopped playing, stopped composing, and he was and his public appearances, also to go to concert, became much less frequent, and so he slowly declined and eventually died in 1897, a few days before his 64th birthday. Brahms wrote a lot of music, wrote 3 piano sonatas, as we said. He wrote 3 violin and piano sonatas, or at least the 3 surviving, 2 cello and piano sonatas, 3 trios with piano and 3 piano quartets. Also, he wrote 4 symphonies and other orchestral music, string quartets, and various other music, a lot of music lieder, which are songs for voice and piano. So there are he wrote music till Opus 122. So his music is very popular, and now he's celebrated as one of the greatest composer of every time. Brahms is buried in Vienna, close to Beethoven and Schubert. His favorite composers. Brahms loved Schubert, and he thought he was the best. And he used to go to the library in Vienna. At the time there were no Xerox copies, so he used to copy his own music by hand, and to hand copy his music to study it at home. He was a very modest person. He knew how good he was, but he knew that he could learn again and again. His music is considered to be the continuation of the great German tradition, the continuation of Beethoven and Schubert and Schumann tradition of the great German music. I invite you to appreciate this music. You can find on my YouTube channel some of it. You can find the piano concerto, you can find a little piano music, the 3 violin sonatas. I have played with Norbert Brain, and I have talked to you about him in a previous live streaming. And thank you, Farouk Konat, for joining us, and the cello sonatas with the German cellist Friedrich Bertolt. So, of course, you can listen to other music from different sources, and all Brahms music is very well recorded. So I hope you are going to enjoy Brahms music. And once again, we are now close to the end of this live streaming, and I'd like to invite you again to join this channel, to subscribe to this channel, and not only to subscribe, but to listen to my music, and not only to mine. Appreciate classical music, which is something very important. Don't forget what Plato, the Greek philosopher of the 4th century before Christ, said, that music educates people to become better and better, and prepare citizens to be real citizens and not servants, because music makes you think and to build your consciousness. So thank you for joining me to this live streaming, and I'll get back to you soon in an occasion. Oh, I was told that I must continue a little more, but I have already talked about Brahms a lot, and I don't feel what I can say, just for some information, is that today is also Piotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky's birthday. Tchaikovsky is mainly a symphonic composer. Unfortunately, there is nothing on my on my YouTube, but you can listen to his music in different channels of the YouTube. Tchaikovsky was a Russian composer, lived between 1840 and 1893, and he wrote also for piano, not very much. He was not a pianist, unlike Brahms, was not a pianist, a professional pianist, never started a piano career. His piano music was played by somebody else, and wrote 6 symphonies and a lot of ballets and some opera. Oh, by the way, forgot to say, Brahms wrote a lot of music, but never wrote an opera. He felt this as a lackness of his life. He said that he was not able to write an opera, never wrote something for stage. And in a certain extent, he envied Richard Wagner, who was the opera writer in the German music, because he couldn't. Actually, everybody says that Brahms was against Wagner. Not true. Brahms himself invited Wagner to Vienna to conduct some music of his in Vienna. So even this is strange. He was against Liszt, who was Wagner's father-in-law, but was not Wagner. He had him, as I said, he had invited him to conduct in Vienna his own music, and he would have liked to write an opera, never succeeded, and therefore this was something he felt as a failure in his life, and therefore this is what we can say about this particular aspect. He tried, but wrote just a cantata, which is a sort of operatic piece, but was not. What else? I think that now we are really done. I don't think there is nobody else who wants to join us this time, and so it's time to say goodbye. And not yet. Continue. Well, I am not a genius I am not an entertainer. I talk about music, but I'm not this kind of entertainer. And in any event, this is the story. Also, Brahms, once when he was really old, already sick, heard in Vienna, went to a concert and could hear a Dvorak cello concerto for cello and orchestra. He was stunned by this music and said, you know, if I knew that a thing like this is possible, I would have tried to do it too, but he didn't do. He wrote instead concertos for violin and orchestra, one concerto for violin and orchestra, who was premiered by Joachim in the end. But they had fights because Joachim wanted to change something in the violin part, saying that it was not affected. Brahms resisted, so they had a terrible fight. Nevertheless, Joachim performed the concerto the way it was written. Brahms wrote also something really special, a double concerto for violin, cello, and orchestra. One of his masterpieces, by the way, and which is quite unusual. A thing like this is quite unusual, and it's one of the masterpieces Brahms wrote. Is a piece wrote in old age and really deserves to be heard. And you can find these two on the YouTube. Basically, on the YouTube, you can find almost everything. You can find fantastic music and also Brahms, even if he was not fond of teaching, he gave some lesson in composition to some students, and also encouraged the young Schenker when he went to Vienna to continue his career. He introduced him to publisher, and Schenker published his music thanks to Brahms' intervention. Schenker had dedicated his 5 Klavierstücke Opus 4 to this Eugen d'Albert, who had performed the 2 piano concertos by Brahms in one night, as I said. And Eugen d'Albert was a very influential figure at the time on the scene. Schenker, at a certain point, gave up playing and gave up composing and became the father of music theory in Vienna. But this is another story we'll talk about another time. What else? Now I fear that we are not able to continue.
Wait, I need to thumbs up yet. All.
Ah.
Nagmamadali.
And what else we can say? By the way, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to appreciate classical music. Not only to subscribe, but listen to classical music, because classical music appreciation is very important for the human mind and creates the precondition for becoming more conscious of what you're on your brain capabilities. Now, what else? Well, of course, we can say many things about Johannes Brahms. He was a big figure in the Vienna, but nevertheless, he was one of the most of the top composers of every time. This we have said, repeatedly said, and what I like is the way he tried to be always coherent with himself. He tried to be to follow the path, I said, of Beethoven and Schubert. In his first symphony, in the last movement of his symphony, he also quotes the theme of the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and this is another demonstration of his love for Beethoven's music. And about Schubert, we have said his leader are influenced by Schubert's vocal music, of course, a lot. As said, Brahms used to go to the Vienna library to copy Schubert's music, and was used to keep doing this. For all his life, he was studying Beethoven's and Schubert's music to learn more about music, about the tradition he was part of. Okay, now it's really time to
Not yet.
see. It's time. It's time. We have talked too much, and nobody is showing up. So thank you for joining us.
Not yet. It still comes up in other account.
Uh, so we are almost close to the end. So if you want to join us for a little while, do it, because also I have to go back to my work. Don't forget that I am not a YouTuber. I am a classical pianist, and I have to go back to my keyboard. Otherwise, you won't have. If I don't do that, you won't get more recordings and more and more and more video on this YouTube channel. So if you want to join us, do it now, please, and let me go back to my work, uh, since I must play for another good number of hours to be able to present what I'm doing. I'll tell you what I'm doing now and what I'm practicing, so you can have an idea what's will happen next. Not in the immediate future, but soon. This year is the anniversary, the 700th anniversary of the famous Italian poet Dante Alighieri's death. There are celebrations all over the country, and for this reason, I am preparing a program dedicated to this important, maybe the father of Italian poetry. And we talked about Liszt a bit, incidentally, in this live broadcast. Liszt wrote also cycles of piano music, very important. And in one of those, there is a fantasy quasi-sonata, which is called After a Dante's Reading. So I'm preparing this. In the same cycle, we have a set of music inspired by another Italian poet by name Petrarca, Francesco Petrarca, and a set, a sort of, we would call it a cover now, a cover of a canzonetta by a 17th century composer by name Salvator Rosa. This cycle, which is very important, is very interesting. I'm going to prepare for live concerts in celebration of the Dante's Day. Also, this year is the 110th anniversary of Liszt's birth, and the 220th anniversary of Liszt's birth, and the 135th anniversary of Liszt's death. So I'm going to prepare this too. Next year, 2022 will be instead the 150th anniversary of Alexander Nikolaevich Scriabin's birth, and I plan to play the complete cycle of Scriabin's piano sonata. But we will talk about it later in another occasion. Nobody shows up now. It's now time to go. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to meeting you again in another live streaming. And don't forget once again to subscribe to this channel, and not only to subscribe, but listen to good music. You can find some Brahms music on my YouTube channel. You can find a cycle of piano music, there's 3 intermezzos opera, opus 117, and the Brahms piano concerto in a recording I made in my young age, in my youth, and as well as the complete cycle of violin and the violin and cello sonatas. So once again, thank you for joining us, and looking forward to talking about something else in the future. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon, a good night, whatever.
I-replyan you all your post this all moment messaging.
Who is that? Oh, okay.